Put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now as we continue to set the table for the 25-26 college basketball season. We are now just 3 weeks away from the start of the 25-26 college basketball season. I want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also, want you to do us a favor, want you to get into the chat, want you to send along your questions. I'll get to them later in the show because, as always, the goal and the intent of this show is to serve you, the college basketball fan. So if you have a pressing opinion, if you have a question that's really, really resonating on your mind, send it right now. We will get to it later in the show. As I mentioned, we are 3 weeks away from the start of the 25-26 college basketball season, 3 weeks away from opening night. I was traveling around the country again last week, was down in the Triangle, saw Duke, Carolina, NC State, also did a stopover at UNC Wilmington, saw St. John's on Saturday at Carnesecca Arena in Queens. So a lot of things to get to, a very exciting time of year as we continue to count down to what's going on in college basketball. Preseason polls are coming out, preseason awards are coming out, and we'll get to all of those things here throughout the course of the show. But first, as always, it's time to get to three big things. And thing number one on the agenda for me today is real simple. It comes on the heels of my visit to St. John's on Saturday. St. John's needs its exhibition games. Now, coming into the season, I've said on this platform, I've said on other platforms, without hesitation, that St. John's, pound for pound, inch for inch, has the most talented roster in college basketball. I don't think there's really any way to deny that. That does not mean by any intent that St. John's has the best team in college basketball. And when I went and spent a couple of hours in Queens on Saturday, one of the things I really saw, St. John's needs to play somebody else. St. John's needs to get some of its kinks out. St. John's needs to continue to find rhythm and chemistry because I will say this, there is no better collection of offensive talent than what Rick Pitino has put together this season at St. John's. You have got scorers on the wings in Isaiah Sellers, who is now going to be obviously operating at point guard, Ian Jackson, and also Jozon Sannon. You have a potential lethal front court combination with Bryce Hopkins and Zuby Ejiofor. But I will say this, after taking in practice on Saturday, it is clear to me that St. John's needs time to play together against somebody other than themselves. St. John's needs repetitions to get rhythm and chemistry at the highest possible level heading into opening night. Turnovers, role allocation, all those things need to come out in the wash between now and the start of the season on November 3rd when St. John's will take on MAC favorite Quinnipiac at Carnesecca Arena. Now, with that said, there were a couple of standouts from practice. Dylan Mitchell, the transfer from Cincinnati, who's a do-everything forward and can have a major impact potentially on St. John's this year because he can have a great impact on the game without demanding shots, is somebody I think that's going to be a fan favorite immediately for the Big East school at both Carnesecca Arena and Madison Square Garden. And I've been saying this for years. I firmly believe that college basketball should have a national Sixth Man of the Year award. I think an early favorite, an early candidate for that title in 25-26 could be Dylan Mitchell, who started his career at Texas, then went to Cincinnati, played for a year under Wes Miller, and now is at St. John's. He is going to be a major cog in Rick Pitino's attack. Now, who else stood out? Ian Jackson, the transfer from North Carolina, is a big-time offensive talent. I mean the type of offensive talent that could explode at any time like a volcano. Throughout one stretch in practice on Saturday, he made 4 3-point shots. Multiple of those makes came off the dribble. Ian Jackson is a big-time offensive talent. But do one thing and do yourself a favor. In no way, shape, or form, and we've heard Rick Pitino talk about this on this show when he was on over the summer. In no way, shape, or form is Ian Jackson going to be a recreation of Kadari Richmond. Vastly different players. Richmond, obviously an initiator, somebody who had great basketball instincts, could make people better. Ian Jackson, a much more gifted offensive player, a much more gifted shooter. And from what we saw on Saturday, St. John's is going to ride with he on a wing, Jozon Sannon on a wing, and Isaiah Sellers, somebody who's, I think, one of the best shooters in the country at the point. There is not a traditional point guard on St. John's roster. We've obviously heard from Rick Pitino on that in the preseason, and that is why I'm so fascinated to watch this team over the next 2 Saturdays. I'll be in attendance on Saturday when St. John's plays CAA favorite Towson. Towson, a team that if it made the NCAA tournament, could be a 15 or a 14 seed. Tyler Tejada back, Dylan Williamson back, 2 players who, again, were a part of a team under Pat Skerry that people thought had a chance to go into the NCAA tournament out of the CAA, but ultimately lost in the CAA tournament semifinals. St. John's will then play Michigan, a top 10 team, under Dusty May at Madison Square Garden on October the 25th, and open the season, as I referenced, against Quinnipiac, coached by Tom Pecora, a program that has won each of the past 2 MAC regular season titles on November 3rd at Carnosec Arena. So any way you slice it now, St. John's is going to get a real test against Towson, a potential 15 or 14 seed CAA favorite on Saturday. You're taking on Michigan in what could be an Elite Eight caliber game and an Elite Eight caliber opponent at Madison Square Garden on the 25th. And then the game against Quinnipiac, against Tom Pecora and company on November 3rd, could be the equivalent of playing a 16 or a 15 seed on Selection Sunday. Amari Monroe, MAC Player of the Year, obviously going to be in tow. So the next 3 games are going to be great barometers for St. John's. Now, while I am waiting to see how the rhythm, how the chemistry, how the turnovers are going to be managed here over the next couple of weeks before St. John's starts the season on October 3rd, this is the thing I keep going back to. Even though it may take some time to get the ball moving on offense, even though it may take some time to get Bryce Hopkins and Zuby Ejiofor playing together at a high level, a tandem that could remind people of some of those great high-low tandems that Bill Self had when he was at the University of Kansas. Even with all that said, I don't know if there's going to be an opponent that St. John's will play this season that will have more talent. And Rick Pitino, one of the things that's made him one of the great college coaches of this generation is he hasn't always needed the best talent to win big. This year, for the most part, he's going to have the best talent. So you start thinking about St. John's and the season. You start thinking about the landscape of the Big East. The marquee games for St. John's during the non-conference portion of the schedule: Alabama and Ole Miss at the Garden, Kentucky in the CBS Sports Classic, and then 3 games in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas: Iowa State, Baylor, and then a to-be-determined opponent based on how those couple of days shake out. Given the fact that St. John's has the personnel that it does, and given the fact that St. John's has Rick Pitino as its head coach, I don't see St. John's losing more than 2 games during the non-conference portion of the schedule. And given the fact that the Big East right now, as we tape this show on October 13th, clearly looks like St. John's, UConn, and everybody else, I would be shocked if St. John's won fewer than 16 regular season games in the Big East. So what does that mean? If you win 9 non-conference games and you win a minimum of 16 Big East games, you're going to be 25-6 going into the Big East tournament. You win a couple of games there, you are in position again, in my opinion, to be a top 8 to 12 seed in the NCAA tournament. And to me, if you are St. John's or you are the University of Connecticut, and Dan Hurley has put together for this Connecticut team, this rendition of UConn, the best non-conference schedule in the history of UConn basketball, November and December for UConn and St. John's is paramount, because those are the games that are ultimately going to dictate what type of seed you could get in the NCAA tournament with all the mysteries that are going on in the Big East right now. We give Creighton the benefit of the doubt because they deserve the benefit of the doubt, but they're not playing with Ryan Kalkbrenner. Ryan Kalkbrenner, one of the great defensive players in the history of the Big East. How is Creighton going to be defensively without Kalkbrenner in the middle? Think about what this guy has done during his tenure at Creighton. 2025 round of 32, 2024 Sweet 16, 2023 Elite 8, 2022 second round of the NCAA tournament, nearly beat the national champion Kansas Jayhawks, 2021 Sweet 16, lose to Gonzaga. What will Creighton be like defensively? How will Marquette, a team that lost Cam Jones, lost Stevie Mitchell, lost David Joplin from a team that didn't win a game in the NCAA tournament, how will Marquette be? Will Providence be that much improved? Will Georgetown be a threat for a bid? There are nothing but questions for the teams aside from UConn and St. John's with the Big East, and that is why those non-conference games are paramount for those two programs. And if you're St. John's and you're Rick Pitino and you're St. John's and you're a team that's going to start the season in the top 5, you can honestly say, if you are a fan now of the Red Storm program, you can say now without hesitation, this may be the best chance this program has had to get to a Final Four since the mid-'80s with Mark Jackson, Chris Mullin, Walter Berry. There were other times St. John's went far in the NCAA tournament. 91, upset Ohio State with Lou Carnesecca, lost to Duke 78-61 in the regional finals. Obviously, 99 with Mike Jarvis. He had that great team he inherited from Fran Fraschilla. 3 seed, beat Indiana in the round of 32, beat Maryland in the Sweet 16 with Steve Francis, had the loss to Ohio State 77-74 with Scooney Penn and Michael Redd and company. But I think given the landscape of college basketball, given the fact that you have the most talented roster in the sport, given the fact that Rick Pitino is your head coach, there is no greater opportunity for St. John's to get to a Final Four than during the 25-26 season. No greater opportunity. And if you are a St. John's fan, this is the thing you need to be paying attention to. You heard Dan Hurley on this show in studio a couple of weeks ago talking about how every single game matters in college basketball. Last year, UConn lost to Colorado in Seton Hall. Those 2 losses might have dropped the Huskies 2 seed lines. So if you're St. John's and you are thinking about the 6 games I mentioned in the non-conference portion of the schedule, Alabama, Ole Miss at the Garden, Kentucky and Atlanta, Iowa State, Baylor, and 1 more in Vegas, you got to win at least 4 of those games because you're not just playing for a high seed in the NCAA tournament. You are not just playing for ultimately another Big East regular season tournament title. You are playing for the chance to go to the Final Four on the Amtrak. First 2 rounds, probably, if you are the 1 seed in the East, or most likely if you're the 1 seed in the East, it will be in Philadelphia. And then the East Regional Finals will be in Washington. So if you're St. John's, you are thinking, get a 1 seed in the East, start in Philadelphia, win 2 there, and then win 2 in Washington, D.C. It could be a scenario where for St. John's fans, they would go to Penn Station, take the Amtrak to Philadelphia for 2 games, either go back or stay on the road, and then go and take the Amtrak to Washington, D.C. for the East Regionals. But as you and I both know, this is only October. Number 2 on 3 big things. Point guard and small forward are the biggest questions for Duke. Now, last week, I went to Cameron Indoor Stadium. I took in a Duke practice, and I looked at Duke's roster up and down. And I thought about the big roster pictures heading into practice. Isaiah Evans, you've heard me talk about him on this program, is ready to explode as Duke's second leading scorer behind Cam Boozer, who obviously is a known commodity and a stalwart of power forward. John Shire also feels obviously very comfortable with Patrick Gongba and Malik Brown at the 5 spot. Malik Brown was out the day I was there, but in talking to Jon Scheyer, he feels very, very obviously comfortable and excited about Brown getting back and be part of that two-headed monster with Patrick Gongba, who I think is an under-the-radar breakout guy nationally. So the big questions, if you're Duke right now, are at point guard and at small forward. At point guard, loyalty has been the big thing. And it's been loyalty to Caleb Foster, somebody who, again, was an ancillary perimeter piece last year. And now he steps in with the opportunity to be Duke's starting point guard. He's not a table-setting point guard in the purest form, but he has the ability to initiate offense and also be a scorer. And then there's the other half of the Boozer twins, Caden Boozer, who is much more of a pure table setter than Caleb Foster. Caden Boozer led Duke over the summer in assists and has always been a great setup guy. It will be interesting to see how that dynamic works. And then there's obviously the battle at small forward. And going into Duke practice, it was clear there were 3 people who were competing for the small forward spot at Duke. Dame Sarr, Darren Harris, and Nick Hemenya. 1 sophomore, 2 freshmen. Watching the practice and being in this climate, I am always prone to watch people who can add offense. And when I was at Duke practice a year ago, even though he didn't play a lot on a team that went to the Final Four, Darren Harris looked like a bona fide bucket getter. Darren Harris looked like somebody who could come into the game and extend the defense. And that's something that, again, Jon Scheyer and his staff may want to use off the bench and reserve to get offense. But from the day I was there, I went in thinking Harris with his shot making could stand out. And it was just one day that I was there. But Dame Sarr made an impression with his defense, with his ability to distort plays. He also, a couple of times as the practice progressed, not only had his defense create offense, but he also was able to be in the corner and make a couple of open threes like Bruce Bowen used to do for the San Antonio Spurs. He had that type of ability. And now you look at the dynamic surrounding Duke and you look at the small forward spot. That is one thing I'm keeping a close eye on because you got 3 guys, Sarr, Hemenya, and Harris, vying for the opportunity to be the starting small forward for Duke in 25-26. Small forward and point guard, Caleb Foster, Caden Boozer are the 2 big question marks for the Blue Devils. Some other nuggets from my time in the Triangle. North Carolina is significantly bigger and longer than last season. North Carolina looks much more, in my opinion, like a Roy Williams coach team. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the things, ironically enough, that Hubert Davis talked about when he got the job in 2021 at North Carolina was the idea that he wanted to play with a more skilled power forward to extend the defense and get more shooting and skill on the floor. North Carolina hit lightning in a bottle with that the first year that Hubert Davis was the head coach with Brady Manick, who was a major reason why the Tar Heels went all the way to the national championship game and almost beat Kansas and won the national championship. Pete Nance was obviously in tow the next year. That team never lived up to expectations after being the preseason number 1. And now North Carolina is looking, again, up front at least, much more like a Roy Williams team than a Hubert Davis team, at least so far. Now, what do I mean by that? North Carolina is going to play 2 bigs. Caleb Wilson, a 5-star freshman, has all sorts of palpable buzz around him. Blocking shots, running the floor, and he is going to pair up front with Henry Visar, the transfer from Arizona, who, again, can step out, face the basket. But there is going to be, at least from what it looks like from my vantage point, legitimate size up front. Alabama transfer Jaron Stevenson and Zayden High are also 2 bigs who likely won't start, but will be in the mix for North Carolina. Hubert Davis told me he's also high on another freshman, Derek Dixon, to play on the perimeter. Seth Trimble, I expect to have an all-ACC type of year. But to me, the key to this whole operation is still Kyan Evans, the transfer from Colorado State. Now, to Kyan Evans' credit, he had a major hand in the 11-game winning streak that Colorado State had at the end of the year, where the Rams, who were coached obviously brilliantly by Nico Medved, who's now the head coach at Minnesota, went all the way to the round of 32 and nearly beat Maryland to get to the Sweet 16. Kyan Evans, though, is stepping up a weight class. He proved he was a really, really good shooter at Colorado State. Because of the size that I mentioned with North Carolina, he's going to get more open shots. There is much more positional size around him than there was last year when North Carolina played Elliot Cadeau, RJ Davis, Seth Trimble, and sometimes Ian Jackson together. North Carolina is much bigger and longer across the board. Are the Tar Heels better? I think North Carolina will be a much better defensive team. But the backbone of great play at North Carolina, since I've been doing this, has been elite point guard play. And you think back to the runs that North Carolina had when they were really, really good. Ray Felton, 2005. Ty Lawson, 2009. Kendall Marshall, before he got hurt in 2012, was obviously the point guard on a team that had all the requisites to go to a Final Four. Joel Berry in 2017. Kobe White, when North Carolina was a 1 seed in 2019 and lost to Auburn. And of course, RJ Davis and Caleb Love in 2022. How much can Kyan Evans amplify what he showed at Colorado State? We don't know. But that is something I am looking at and putting in bold print. I think North Carolina is going to be better defensively. I think North Carolina is going to have better depth. I don't know, though, yet how much better North Carolina will be from the team last year that made the first four, beat San Diego State, and lost to Ole Miss. But once again, this is only October. NC State has a stable floor. Now, what do I mean by that? When I went to NC State, compared to North Carolina, compared to Duke, you did not see the long-term upside that you might have seen with Duke and Carolina. You didn't see anybody who looked like Cameron Boozer. You didn't see anybody who looked like Dame Sarr or Caleb Wilson. But I will say this, that doesn't always equate to having the best college basketball team. And I will bring this up again. Last year, Rutgers had 2 of the top 5 picks in the 2025 NBA draft. St. John's had no players drafted and won more than double the amount of games of Rutgers. And 3 times in the last decade, 3 players who were the number 1 overall picks in the NBA draft. Anthony Edwards from Georgia, Markelle Fultz from Washington, and Ben Simmons from LSU. 3 times those players who were number 1 picks in the NBA draft, their teams in college basketball the year before did not make the NCAA tournament. So what about NC State? Why is the floor stable? I see a lot of very solid college players. I see a potential first-team All-American in Darian Williams, a below-the-rim star that's going to be a focal point and an epicenter for Will Wade. I think he'll be a 17, 6 or 7 rebounds, 5 and 6 assist guy. He has the ability, again, in my opinion, to be the ACC Player of the Year. Van Allen Lubin, we know what we saw from him at Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, and North Carolina. He looks very steady at center. He'll be backed up by somebody, Musa Sagnia, who Will Wade got late, who I think will obviously play a big role defensively in defending the front of the rim. Trey Holloman from Michigan State, an excellent assist-to-turnover ratio point guard, is your point guard. And the thing that really stood out after watching NC State practice was the depth on this team's perimeter. And don't be shocked if you see Will Wade's team play 4 guard sets when Darian Williams is out of the game. Terrence Arsenault, the transfer from Houston, former top 30 recruit, looks like a potential ACC small ball 4. He was really good defensively when I was there. Matt Abel, a 5-star freshman, Quadir Copeland and Alan Breed, transfers from McNeese, all look like capable players in the perimeter rotation. And I think the guy that really stood out for NC State and who shot the blood out of the ball when I was there was Paul McNeil. Paul McNeil, I saw 2 years ago when Kevin Keats was the coach at an NC State practice and thought he had great potential. He could be a major cog for NC State, especially if this team goes small with Terrence Arsenault as a small ball power forward. Now, I'll say this. NC State doesn't necessarily, again, have the long-term upside of some of the other players they're going to go against in the ACC. Not anybody on NC State like Mikel Brown. There isn't anybody on NC State like Mikel Brown or Cam Boozer or Caleb Wilson, but that doesn't matter. Will Wade's got an NCAA tournament team. Will Wade's got a team, in my opinion, that I think should be in the NCAA tournament, and I would think would be in the 7, 8, 9 seed range. And we'll see what other rabbits Mr. Will Wade can pull out of his hat as he attempts to obviously make his way again to the top of a power conference, won the SEC regular season title when he was at LSU. I have went on a long enough soliloquy right there. I want to hear from you. I want to get your thoughts in the chat. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Your comments, your questions when we return.
Only CBS Sports can bring you big time during the heart of Saturday afternoons. It's big time.
It's big time. It's big time. It's big time.
On CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Jon Rothstein here back on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to get your comments in the chat. Again, we are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. And also want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. Okay, let's go to Satchel Pena Rivera. John, do you agree with UConn at 4 and St. John's at 5? What could be the argument behind it? Well, you're referencing the AP Top 25, which came out today. I'll tell you this much. Preseason rankings and $2 can get you a Metro card. They mean absolutely nothing. And rankings during the season mean absolutely nothing. It's an exercise that we all do in the media to give our 2 cents, which makes it fun every single week, or in my case, every single day. But I will say this without hesitation, okay? Do not get worked up in preseason rankings. Get worked up in resumes for the NCAA tournament. That ultimately makes, the ultimate difference in where your team is going to be. Okay. Satchel Pena Rivera says that the toughest games are easily going to be Bama, Kentucky, and Iowa State. Can easily see those being the only losses for St. John's. Well, you have to remember this. If St. John's is going to advance deep in the Players Era tournament, there could be a third difficult game looming in Las Vegas. St. John's could play Houston in Las Vegas. That's something that could be on the table for the Red Storm. There's so many great teams in that event. Kansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Gonzaga, Maryland. So St. John's' non-conference schedule is going to have another marquee game, and it could be the highest level of a marquee game if the Red Storm beat Iowa State, beat Baylor those first couple days in Vegas. Ryan Tracy says, John, who is the X factor for Duke to be a title contender? Point guard play, wing production, or health up front with Brown, Gongba? Look, I am more than fine with Pat Gongba and Malik Brown at center for Duke. More than fine. Gongba has gotten himself in great shape. To me, he looks like he's going to have a big-time year. I think that Pat Gongba is a breakout guy in the ACC. I said it when I talked about Duke. You're looking at a couple of different things. Who's going to separate as a three-man? Sarr, Harris, or Hermenia? And what is the dynamic going to be at point guard? Caleb Foster has been in the program. He's been a grizzled veteran at Duke. Caden Boozer gives a different look. How does John Shire manage that? It's all stuff that's going to come out in the wash here over the next couple of weeks. Duke's got an exhibition game against Tennessee. Duke's got an exhibition game against UCF. These are all things that, again, we are going to look at and try to discover over the next couple of weeks. Dylan Rosenkovinsky, 2624, says, John, which mid-major to a high-major school are you most excited to watch? This is easy. Donovan Dent. Because I look at Donovan Dent last year, 20 points, 6 assists, Mountain West Player of the Year, All-American, and he's going to a UCLA team that had the worst power conference point guard play in college basketball last year. Just the way it was. UCLA, since losing Tiger Campbell in 2023, a player that was all Pac-12 first team 3 years in a row, has not adequately replaced Tiger Campbell at point guard until now with Donovan Dent. And I'm thinking about the guys he's going to play with. Sky Clark, Eric Daly, who I love, Tyler Bilodeau, probably the best scoring forward that not enough people talk about nationally. These guys are going to get so many more opportunities offensively because you're playing with Donovan Dent. And it might even come to this. UCLA may be better if Donovan Dent distributes more and scores less. We'll see how that comes to pass when the season starts. But look, the supporting cast at New Mexico last year, in my opinion, was not as good as the supporting cast offensively as the one 2 years ago with Jalen House, with Jamal Mashburn Jr. Donovan Dent, to me, is a player that could average 8-9 assists a game. He's that talented. We'll put a bow on this show when we return. A couple of good nuggets from around the country. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. We're going to wrap the show with 3 good nuggets. Earlier today, in addition to the AP Top 25 being released, the SEC preseason poll was released. And the thing that really stood out to me, which was shocking, was that Arkansas was picked 5th. Now, there were a couple of teams picked ahead of Arkansas. And again, I don't put too much stock into preseason polls, so I don't get, too worked up because, like I said, the polls ultimately don't matter. But Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama were picked ahead of Arkansas. This is my rationale right now. Arkansas returns the highest percentage of returning scoring among SEC teams from last season. Arkansas also brings in 4 players who are expected to have major impacts in the rotation. Top 10 freshman Darius Acuff at point guard, Malik Thomas, another talented freshman, Nick Pringle from South Carolina, and Malik Ewan from Florida State. And Arkansas brings back 4 players from a Sweet 16 team. DJ Wagner, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond, Trevin Brazil. I don't understand how, this is just me, you would pick other teams ahead of Arkansas like Tennessee and Alabama. I think Arkansas and Kentucky are really, really close. Really, really close. But I always lean on returning experience, and I'm looking at a Sweet 16 team in Arkansas bringing 4 guys back. I know Kentucky brings back Otego Away. I know Kentucky brings back Brandon Garrison. The returning experience for me at Arkansas gives Arkansas a slight edge over Kentucky. Florida has picked 1. And I'm going to go to Florida practice on Tuesday to see the Gators. But we have to remember this. The really good teams in college basketball have guards back. Florida lost Walter Clayton Jr., Elijah Martin, Will Richard from that team that won the national championship. Think about that. Think about the players that Florida had on the perimeter last year. Denzel Aberdeen went to Kentucky. I know that. But all those guys, the starting perimeter and the top guard off the bench, are no longer in Florida's program. I'll have a better idea after I see the Gators on Tuesday just how good they are. But it doesn't, to me, make any sense to see Arkansas 5th in the SEC preseason poll. Nugget number 2, proceed with caution. And I'm talking about overreacting to results from preseason exhibition games or secret scrimmages. This is what you have to know. Many coaches are not running their plays. Many coaches are not using their regular substitution patterns. So as much as we want to dive into everything, and there's another exhibition game tonight, UConn plays Boston College at Mohegan Sun. Let's breathe a little bit. Let's err on the side of caution because the curtain doesn't really come up until November 3rd, 3 weeks from tonight. So don't read too much into these exhibition results. I remember a couple years ago, Nebraska played Colorado. Fred Hoiberg was the coach. Nebraska had Bryce McGowens, Alonzo Verge. Nebraska goes out, beats Colorado by 25. Solid Colorado team. Nebraska went on to unravel and have a terrible, terrible season. Do not read too much into these early results. And the third nugget, and this goes back to something we talked about last week, the proposed expansion model for the NCAA tournament, which Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger reported about a week and a half ago. In diving more into this, what ultimately would happen is the NCAA tournament in its first 2 days would ultimately, in terms of the 12 automatic qualifiers that would start Tuesday and Wednesday in either Dayton or a site on the West Coast, would ultimately become a watered-down version of ESPN's Bracket Buster event, which they had a couple of years ago, if you remember. And the Bracket Buster event did not include, if you remember this, like the worst mid-majors in the country. It included the best mid-majors in the country. Now, these AQs are going to be in the NCAA tournament on Tuesday and Wednesday, but the dynamic of it changes. And here's why. It goes back to what I said last week, and I will continue to say. NCAA tournament expansion will not help mid-majors. If this model was adopted, where the 12 worst at-large teams and the 12 lowest-seeded AQs play on Tuesday, Wednesday, the following 12 teams, I just want to read them off again, that played last year as seeds 57 through 68, St. Francis, Alabama State, Mount St. Mary's, American, SIU Edwardsville, Norfolk State, Bryant, Omaha, Wofford, Robert Morris, Montana, and UNC Wilmington would then all play on Tuesday, Wednesday in 6 games. Now, in 2025, under the model that currently exists, 10 of those teams moved on to the round of 64. And if you've heard me on this platform and on other platforms, I firmly believe that every single AQ deserves the right to play on Thursday or Friday in the NCAA tournament. Instead, those 12 teams are going to play on Tuesday, Wednesday under this potential model in what will be a watered-down version of ESPN's Bracket Buster. This is not like when we saw Gonzaga play Butler under Brad Stevens when Roosevelt Jones made that unbelievable shot. This is not when VCU played Wichita State with Shaka Smart squaring off against Greg Marshall. This is not going to be that. It is going to be a scenario where instead of 10 of the 12 teams who were the last 12 seeded automatic qualifiers, instead of 10 of those teams playing on Thursday and Friday in the round of 64, it would only go to 6. And those 6 winners will be your 4 16 seeds and your 2 15 seeds. That means, and I counted this, there are 12 other teams that will be automatic qualifiers from one-bid leagues. And I looked this up from teams in 2025 who would not have made the NCAA tournament had they not won their conference tournament. And this is just the exercise I chose to do. The next 12 would be Troy, Lipscomb, Grand Canyon, Akron, High Point, Yale, Liberty, McNeese, Colorado State, UC San Diego, VCU, and Drake. Those are teams that I believe would not have gotten at large bids. So what happens then under this new model, 2 of these teams become the last 2 15 seeds. The next 8 of the 12 become the 14 and the 13 seeds, and then you have 2 who are going to be 12s. That means that March Madness 12-5 spot, in all likelihood, which for years has been a place where fans, especially from the periphery, look to pick first-round upsets, are going to be occupied by what? Likely power conference teams. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you think that NCAA tournament expansion is going to benefit mid-majors, I've got some swampland to sell you in Florida. Because not only is the access to this proposed model going to heavily favor power conference programs, but we are also going to see with this new model 4 mid-major programs not be able to go and play on Thursday and Friday compared to what we're seeing now. And that's just the way it is. And I don't really know how much more tangible evidence I can give you. Will there be outliers if we go to 76 in those extended 8 spots? Sure. Once in a while, could the WCC get somebody else in addition to, let's just say, a Gonzaga or a St. Mary's, even though Gonzaga's leaving the league in a year? Sure. Could the Mountain West get an extra team in that 8 once in a while? Sure. Could the A10? Maybe. Sure. But aside from that, the facts are the facts. And if you don't believe that, then you are ignoring a harsh reality. NCAA tournament expansion is about one thing: to get more power conference teams into the NCAA tournament. This is only October, but we are 3 weeks away from the start of the 25-26 college basketball season. We will be back all week and all preseason with more content as you continue to fill your plate with everything you need to get you set for the upcoming college basketball season. I'm Jon Rothstein, and this was Inside College Basketball Now.